So this video will show you how to take apart and reinstall a 3-piece crank style of bottom bracket. So in a previous video I show how to take apart and reassemble a 1-piece style of bottom bracket, but this one here is a 3-piece system, and what makes it different is a 1-piece would have an arc here, and this piece of metal would come straight through here, be solid, it would go right through the center here, and it would even be connected to this here, and that would all be one solid piece. This one's different. Each of these crank arms gets wedged onto this middle bottom bracket section here. There's a bolt that goes in the end there, and that's what holds it all together, and another bolt on this side here, right there. That's what holds these all together. But 1-piece and 3-piece cranksets are totally different, so if you have a 1-piece, make sure you go to the other tutorial and watch how to do it there. So the first thing you want to do here is take both of your cranks off so you can access the middle here. So you're going to first want to take the chain off and just set it here on the frame like that so that the cranks can move freely without the chain getting in the way. And you want to start, we'll start on this side. There's a little dust cover that goes on the end here, this little plastic piece. And sometimes there's 2 little notches in it that you can use to screw it off. This one you just have the little edge where you can just put a screwdriver in and it just pops off just like that. That's just a dust cap. It keeps stuff from getting inside that hole there. So this bottom bracket here uses nuts on either end for holding the 2 cranks on. However, they also make ones which instead of having nuts uses bolts. So it looks like this, and instead of having threads that a nut goes onto, it has a hole in it, and these bolts thread into the hole. So there's the hole, there's the bolt. It works exactly the same way. Doesn't make any difference which one you have. So to remove this crank, first we got to take this nut off. And for this one, it uses a 14mm socket. This type of bolt also uses the same 14mm, but they also make bolts that have Allen heads in the end, so you just need an Allen key to take that off. So I'll just start by loosening that off. It's just a right-handed thread, so it goes in the counterclockwise direction to take off, like that. After I get it started, you can always finish it with your fingers. And that's what that nut looks like. So that nut is the only hardware that goes on there. So now I've got all the hardware removed. You might expect that I'd just be able to pull this crank off. But in fact, it doesn't work like that. The way that these are designed is so that these 2 pieces get wedged together. So you can see on the edge here, this thing is sort of tapered. You look from the edge like that, you can see that it gets thicker the further in that it goes. So what happens is this square end goes into this square hole here, and then you tighten your nut or your bolt onto the other end, and what you're doing is you're wedging those 2 surfaces really tight together. So after you've actually tightened it, you could probably even take that nut off. It doesn't really do anything after it's wedged in place. But you need a special tool to be able to pry these 2 parts back apart again after they've been so tightly held together. So the special tool that you'll need to take off this crank here should look something like this. This is called a crank puller, and the way that it works is this outer surface here, these threads correspond with the threads which are on the outside of this circle here. So this piece here fixes itself to the crank itself, and then as you rotate this handle around and around and around, you'll see that this other little edge here pushes itself out, so like that. And so as you turn it, this part here is pushing up against the end of the bottom bracket here, so this bolt here, and it's pushing them and it's prying those 2 surfaces back apart again so you can remove your crank from your bottom bracket. So this tool here is all right threaded, so this thing rotates on with right thread, so it goes on just the regular threading on direction, so it goes on like that, just like that. Get it as tight as you can with your fingers, and then grab a wrench and then snug it up a little bit, because the last thing you want is this thing to be only on partially, and then you're prying it because you want as many threads on there as possible so that the tool doesn't break, or so you don't strip the threads. So there, I just snugged it up a little bit with the wrench, and now all you got to do is just start rotating this blue handle here, and then all of a sudden it will become really tight. So right there it's really tight, and that's when the tool actually starts to do its job of prying the 2 surfaces together. So you will have to put a fair bit of force into it. So just trying pretty hard here to get it going. I can just use gravity to help me be able to push down on it like that, and it's starting to move. There we go. And it gets really easy all of a sudden, and that means that these can come apart now. So you just got to use your wrench here to remove the tool from this side, and then we'll put it back on the other side and do exactly the same thing on the drive side of the bike. So now you can see with the two cranks removed, so one crank goes on here, the other crank goes on here, and then there's this piece in the middle which is the actual bottom bracket itself, and that's what makes it a three-piece system. There's the two cranks plus this middle piece here. So my bike looks pretty rusty and dirty right now, and that's because I've just finished another Canadian winter, riding this bike pretty much every day through all the salt and the sand and all the stuff they put on the road. So it takes quite a toll on a bike. So at the end of the winter, it's always good to take all this stuff apart and redo all the bearings, put new grease in there and everything. And I actually been hearing some funny noises coming from here, so I wanted to take it apart and take a look at the bearings and make sure that all the ball bearings and everything were good. And I could also feel there's a little bit of play in this shaft here, so I want to get that fixed as well. So we can take the chain off from here for now, just to get it out of our way. And then we're going to take the hardware off of this end here so we can get inside. So on this side of the bottom bracket, you've got two pieces of hardware. You've got the cone, which is on the inside, that's this inside surface here, and then you've got this outer ring, which is called the lock ring. And basically it works the same way that a lock nut works on a wheel bearing. And if you haven't seen my wheel bearing video, you might want to watch that one just to understand a little bit about how locking surfaces work. But basically what it does is it locks the cone so it's always in the same spot so that the ball bearings stay with the right amount of tension on them, so you don't have it loosening itself off and getting a lot of play in your shaft here. So the first thing you're going to want to do here to get inside your bottom bracket is take off this lock ring here. And as with many of the things in this tutorial, there's unfortunately a lot of specialized tools that you need to use for doing this kind of a task. So there's this tool here which has this little tooth at the top which fits inside these little notches, and it goes on there like that, and that's what you use for loosening this off. But you probably could do it with vice grips as well, a big pair of vice grips all the way around, but the correct way is to use a tool that looks something like this. So this is just a right-handed thread, so it means it uses the right-hand rule. So we want to take it in this direction. The lock ring should come off in this direction, so we rotate in the direction that our fingers curl. So we just put the tool on there like that. Unfortunately, I can't really use gravity as my friend to do it because this piece is in my way. So I'm going to have to push pretty hard on this to get it off. And there it comes. So after you get it started, you can just loosen it up with your fingers. That piece just goes around the outside and it looks like that. And then this here is the cone, and unfortunately they make cones with lots of different shapes and stuff. For taking them off, you have to use lots of different specialized tools to do it. Some of them they make with like a bunch of little holes that you put a special tool in and rotate the holes. This one uses a tool that looks like this, which goes on the end there, and it sort of grips on the edges there, and just a special wrench. You could probably just use a regular adjustable wrench though too to take it off as well. Yeah, you just rotate that off. And there it comes off. So inside there you can see one set of caged bearings. They usually put the bearings in a special cage like this, but sometimes they put them loose as well. And then the shaft just comes right out, and there is actually another set of bearings on the other side in there. They're a little bit hard to get to sometimes, but this other cone on here is removable too, so we'll take that off before we start cleaning anything. So the other cone on the other end looks a lot different. There is no lock ring that goes on this side, but for taking this one off, it's got these two little flat spots here. So if you didn't have any special tool, you probably could just use a big adjustable wrench on there to grip those two flat spots and then rotate it off. But it is really difficult because it's only those small little surfaces there, and the wrench can slip off pretty easily. But if you were lucky enough to have a tool that looks like this, on the other end you've got something that looks like this, which is designed to fit right on there like that for taking it off. Because this one does go in there pretty tight, so it is pretty hard to take off. But I'll see if I can get it off. Very important to note on this side that this cone here on this side, it threads on the opposite way. It's left threaded. So if we want to remove it, we use the left-hand rule. So we want to take it off in the direction of our thumb, and we want to rotate in the direction that our fingers curl. So for me to take this off, I got to pull up on this wrench to get it off. So let's see if I can get it. Probably pretty tight. Oh, not too bad actually. There it comes right off. So let's rotate that other cone off, and then we'll clean up all the hardware and put it all back together again. And there's what it looks like inside. So in addition to all the parts that I took off of here, you also want to make sure you clean inside of the hole in the frame where all that hardware goes. Because after everything in here gets sealed together, you don't want to be sealing all sorts of dirt and sand and stuff in there as well, because it will eventually get into your grease and affect those bearings in there. So that's what all the hardware looks like removed from the bike and cleaned up a little bit. And I actually made a little mistake earlier in the video. I was calling these two pieces the cones, and what they actually are is they're cups, because the ball bearings sit inside of here, and the surface that you typically call a cone is this edge here where the other part of the ball bearing presses up against. So the ball bearing cages go in this way, so that the more exposed part of the ball bearing is on the outer side, and the less exposed part is on the inside here. And so this inner surface here rubs up against the inside of the cone here, and the other surface here rubs up against the inside of the cup like this, and that's what makes the bearing system work. So as you're cleaning all this stuff up, you want to make sure that you inspect it as well as make sure that everything's looking in pretty good shape. You want to check inside the cups here and make sure that there's no pitting around the outside edge there. And this one looks in great shape. You can see that nice shiny bit there. If there is pitting, you definitely see it pretty much right away. And this one here looks very good as well. It does look a little bit dirty in there, but it's not actually dirty. It's very clean. It's just little stains that are on the surface, which aren't going to cause you any problems anyways. But just make sure they look good. So you also want to inspect the little cone surfaces on the inside of the shaft here. Make sure there's no rough spots or pitting as well in there. And this one looks quite good. I don't see any rough spots at all on that little shiny spot there. Same on this side. It looks really good as well. Here's an example of one which isn't so perfect. It's got a few little rough spots right around there. There's a little bit of pitting. It's not too bad. Probably this amount you probably wouldn't notice too much. But if there's a serious amount of pitting in there, you would definitely notice it would feel less smooth as you tried to pedal. And the third thing you've got to inspect is your actual bearings, your ball bearings and your bearings cages. You want to make sure that there's no bends or warps in the cage itself, because you definitely don't want that cage to be rubbing up against anything, because then it's going to not be using the ball bearings the way that they're supposed to be. The ball bearings is what's supposed to be taking all of the friction out. So if you got a little bit of this, which is rubbing every time it rotates, it's really going to cause friction and it's going to slow you down. So you want to make sure that they don't look bent, so it looks pretty much the same way all around. And then you want to inspect the actual surface of each bearing and make sure that there's no big pits, big holes, just like with the other two surfaces that we inspected. So I'm happy with all of my hardware here. The first step for reassembly is to fill both of these cup surfaces up with lots of grease. And since they're caged bearings, you also want to make sure that you load the cages full of grease. You want those little gaps in there to have grease in them as well. So you just take some grease on your finger and just roll the bearings around from here, just filling grease into those little gaps so that it won't go dry inside of there as well. So now we've got everything nicely greased up. First we're going to start with the cup that goes on the drive side of the bike, so the one that had those two flat spots. And we're going to take one of the two ball bearing cages and we're going to put it in there. We're going to put it in so this side goes in first, just like that. Just put it in there, and then we're going to rotate that and put it onto the bike. So as I said before, you got to remember that this one here is left threaded. So to tighten it on, you got to go in the opposite direction that you normally tighten things in. So just tighten it on as far as you can with your fingers, and then we'll grab that special wrench and we'll tighten it down nice and tight. And then with our tool, we just push it on so it's nice and tight. You definitely want to make sure you get that nice and tight on there, because if it's a little bit loose, then you'll start to notice problems with your bottom bracket being loose as well. So the next step you want to do is put your bottom bracket shaft back through the hole there. Before I do that, I just want to show something. On this one you can see that these two sides are not perfectly symmetrical. You can see that this side here is a bit longer than the one on here, and they do that on purpose. That's because this side corresponds with the drivetrain, and you got to be able to fit, one of these, so 3 sets of chain rings there on this side without them touching the frame. So they need everything to be shifted out a little bit. So you want to make sure you assemble it the correct way, and you won't notice it if it's wrong until you start to put your cranks back on. Something that this one has, it has a little line here. And I've seen these lines before, and I'm pretty sure they're supposed to correspond, that the line side corresponds with the drive side. So when you're putting this in, you want to put the side that has the line on it through first. I don't think all of them have that line, but I think that's the idea behind that line. So after you've got that shaft in there, the next thing that goes on is your next cage of bearings. So the way it goes on is it goes this end first, because the cup is on the outside, so the cup needs to correspond with this side. So this side needs to go on the inside to touch the cone. So it goes in there like that. And then you take your cup on this side and it goes on, and this is a right thread, so just threads on the normal way that you thread everything else on. Keep going until it starts to get tight. So then after that, your locking ring goes on the outside here, and you want to make sure that you're locking this cup so that it's in the right spot. So that you don't have it so that it's so loose that you can feel that there's a lot of play in it. We also don't want it so that it's so tight that it's really hard to turn it. And right now it's pretty hard to turn, so it's a little bit too tight like that. So I'm just going to loosen it off a little bit before I try putting my lock ring on the outside there. And then to lock those two surfaces together, you need both of your special tools. So this tool goes on the outside there, this one goes on the inside here, and what we're going to do is we're going to put this one here, and we're going to leave it there stationary, and then we're going to tighten the other one so that you're wedging that lock ring up against the inside of the frame there, so that your cup is going to stay in the same spot all the time. So we're just going to do that like this. And you do want to make sure that you get this locking ring on there really tightly. Because after you get it so that it's all positioned in the right spot, you really don't want it to be loosening itself off over time. So now that I've got that nice and tight, I'm just going to do a little inspection to see if there's any play, and I can feel that there's a small amount in there. There's a little bit of trial and error. Every time after you tighten those two surfaces together, things move around a little bit, so you really don't know whether it's going to be good until you're finished. So since it's a little bit loose, what I'm going to do is I'm going to loosen this back off again, and I'm going to rotate this cone a little bit in, and then I'm going to try again and see if I can get it in the right spot. So I'll give that a try. So I just tried a few more times, and I think I've got it in the spot where I like it. I can't feel any play in here at all, and it does rotate, nice and smoothly. So pretty happy with that. So now all the hard work's done. All we got to do is just put our cranks back on, which is quite easy. They just go on the way they came off. All you do is just put it on, just start tightening up that nut. You do need to put quite a bit of force into here because you are having to wedge those two surfaces together. So just keep pushing, and it should go on nicely. This is definitely something you want to have on there very tight, because if they're not tight, then over time your crank will start to become loose and will fall off, and those two surfaces will sort of get warped a little bit, and then you'll need to replace both of them. And that one's good. Now I just put my dust cap back on there, and then we move over to the other side. Now while you have this off, this is a really good opportunity for cleaning up your chain rings. So I'll spend a few minutes doing that before I put this back on here. So now I've got that all nicely cleaned up, ready to reinstall. It's also a good opportunity if you want to clean your front derailleur here, which I've also done. So yeah, this side just goes on exactly the same as the other side there, but you got to make sure that when you install them, they go on so that the two cranks are 180 degrees from one another, because it's pretty hard to ride your bike if there's something like this or something like this. So just make sure that they go on so that they're opposites to one another, just like that. And then you just tighten your nut onto this side too. And then you just put your dust cap on, and the job's pretty much finished. And there the chain is back on the chain rings, and you're good to go. So that concludes my video on how to take apart and reinstall the bottom bracket on a 3-piece crank system. I hope you found this video helpful. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments below. I check my comments fairly regularly, so I'll try and get back to you as soon as possible. But thanks for watching.